Hey there, and welcome to Bottom Shelf Gaming. Over the last couple weeks I've released a couple reviews of games that I've really loved. They've earned a place on my top shelf and really set me off on a streak of reviewing some of the best games of the year. Naturally, my next pick was Horizon Forbidden West, but does it continue the trend or is it little more than a pretty face? Let's find out, starting with the graphics. There's a lot to talk about here, because Horizon certainly doesn't pull any punches in the graphics department. This game looks fantastic, from Aloy's hair that flops around behind her as she runs along the stunning landscapes to the intricacies of the joints and breakable pieces of the giant mechs you fight. This is a category that this game simply doesn't fail on. The use of bright colors in the overworld helped to make images pop and stand out more from the already great graphics of the first game. I'm always a huge proponent of the imagery assisting the gameplay, and this game does that in several ways. One of the ways in which they do this is something we've seen many times before, by coloring climbable ledges in yellow. The ones that aren't outlined in yellow can be scanned and outlined using your focus, which then makes them outlined in yellow. And they also give long grass a bright red coloring at the top, making it stand out and making it very clear that you are hidden and in stealth mode when within it. Personally, I don't like the color choices with the focus, or really the focus at all, as it feels like another detective mode that brings up a heavier UI in a game that really shouldn't need it, but I suppose this comes down to personal preference that I'll talk more about in gameplay. Forbidden West's physics are improved as well, with arrows twanging and vibrating realistically when shot into trees and more meaty materials, where in the first game they would just thunk into a log and lock in place. This sequel adds water sections as well, which are likely the best looking moments of the game, and they stand out with the extraordinary range of detail that's provided. That's the key word here, because this is one of the most detailed looking open world games I've ever seen. It certainly helps that it already had a great foundation and color palette from Zero Dawn to work with, but they've only improved upon that foundation to make, I would say, one of the best looking games of all time. At least when the gameplay is in center focus. In the cutscenes, the characters and their movements have a strange and almost robotic look about them, which is simultaneously fitting due to the game's focus on robotics, and unfitting in the way the graphics enter the uncanny valley during these moments. So close to reality, but missing the mark enough to make these models appear janky and off-putting. Maybe it's just the acting, but the characters don't fully move or look natural to me in these segments. On the subject of robotic, the robots are incredibly detailed, and the amount of work put into them is immediately recognizable. After you've killed one, you can see them visibly twitching and some of their gears still fitting and grinding together. These creatures have separate, distinct pieces that commingle and fit together naturally, and move naturally as well, extremely impressively. It's always going to be more difficult to model human expressions versus mystical beasts naturally due to our familiarity with them, so I suppose the difference is understandable. But I had two occasions where two separate friends walked into the room while I was playing the game, and they both asked separately why the characters looked so strange. This helped cement that it wasn't just me noticing it. Aloy's hair especially won't seem to sit still. It's like someone turned its animations up to 200% as it clips through her clothes and flops around to every slight head movement. This is certainly noticeable during the more serious moments of the game, and gives it a more silly tone than I think is intended. The vast majority of the time though, this game is gorgeous, and nitpicks aside, graphically, this game mostly sings, and receives a score of 18 out of 20. And as always, after graphics, we move on to the sound.
Single seed matters little in the infinite cycle of growth and decay.
It's done. You truly are Elizabeth's blood. With her drive, her sense of mission, her integrity.
And here we get into a difficult topic to cover, because while most of the voice cast is still the same, we got even more famous people thrown into the mix to give the game a little more popularity. But I still don't think that all of the deliveries in this game are particularly well done. The main problem comes down to Aloy, who reacts to every situation with the same matter-of-fact monotony that she always does. It's hard to feel true pathos for your main character when there's no powerful deliveries to be found here. Maybe it's the dialogue that they are given to be delivered, but the actors sound unconvinced, and sometimes even bored. The best performances are by far the uppity royalty or angry chieftains and marshals, who are at least displaying some level of chutzpah within their performances. I'd say the main voice performances range from serviceable to just plain bored and robotic, and this game did nothing to endear Aloy to me more than I already was in Zero Dawn, which was already not that much. This category isn't all going to be negative though, because the music and atmospheric and combat sounds are on a whole nother level. Forbidden West utilizes orchestral music to up the tension and lend weight to the combat interactions parts with great flair and style. I loved the twang of the real instruments almost at odds with each other and hammering away as I fought these mechanical monstrosities. The classical old-school tracks intersperse modern mechanical sounds and mixing as well to make it fit even better within the world setting. The distortion and sound mixing that crops up in these tracks makes what could have felt off in a world overthrown by robots fit in beautifully, and I think it was an inspired choice on behalf of the sound director. This extends to the opening title theme as well, which is a brilliant mix of tribal, orchestral, and mechanical eeriness that makes a great background song for any study session or writing project. Hell, I was listening to it as I typed up this review. The sound effects work as well is masterful. Aloy sounds natural as she moves, jumps, and slides through the environment. I talked earlier about how arrows twang into trees when you fire into them. Well, the impact from your arrows is felt in whatever you're trying to kill, whether it be the skulls of your enemies, a giant mech turtle out for blood, or even a helpless raccoon sprinting pointlessly away from you. The machines have this interesting sound design too, where they shriek mechanically, often eerily mimicking the animals that they're evolved into. I think that this really works and adds a level of immersion to these games that very much could have been lacking. Their movements grind and shift realistically, and the level of detail within the sound work is equivocal to the amount of effort put into the graphics. The atmospheric sounds of birds chirping and animals sauntering around in the background helps add another layer to the sound as well. This is great, although the atmospheric sounds you'd expect when walking through a busy settlement are conspicuously absent, and the people feel like they're waiting for Aloy to walk by before delivering their chosen line they're waiting to say. This gives a colder and less alive feel to the human settlements, which should be bustling with life to lend contrast to the cold robots and their lifeless cauldrons. Overall, a massive improvement over the first game despite some less than stellar voice work, and sound receives a 16 out of 20. Then next, we move on to the gameplay. And the gameplay category is going to be split into two scores, combat and exploration/activities. And these are the categories where one would hope an open world game should thrive. We'll start with the combat, and I'm going to have some harsh things to say about everyone's favorite bow-shooting, trap-slinging protagonist, Aloy. I don't find her particularly fun or intuitive to control. The bow combat starts off as fun as the first game, but quickly gets old as there isn't much to differentiate it from the first game, whose combat also got harder to bear as the game went on, and it got more repetitive. If you're playing on higher difficulties, the combat seems to encourage you to use the stealth options as often as humanly possible. This would be all well and good if the stealth options like the tripwires were actually worth it to use. The best option in stealth is to upgrade your takedowns and just sneak around through the tall grass, chucking rocks and tackling the enemies, something that has been done to death in countless other games. This is additionally worsened by the storylines, both main and side, forcing you constantly into combat scenarios where you are immediately outnumbered and out of stealth. This is where the game suffers most, as you can't keep every enemy in view and there are no sound triggers for when an enemy attacks, so you often die from an unseen attack. The amount of damage some of the smaller, quicker enemies do as well is unbelievable, and the dodge options are just straight up not good. You have a dodge roll, but no real invincibility frames, or very minimal ones, and it's not a viable option to get away from most attacks. This makes for some extremely frustrating combat scenarios where you're constantly healing to almost try and tank your way through a battle, and constantly rolling to hopefully dodge one or two attacks. The amount of times that you have to roll during a battle is actually ridiculous, and it's usually when you're not even expecting an attack. It's just so you don't accidentally get hit from behind and die immediately. I actually had to turn down the difficulty in this game because I didn't find a fun way to play it on the hard mode, at least with it forcing you into combat every 5 seconds. This doesn't improve as you level either, because while you're doing more damage and often struggling less, you don't actually feel as though you've improved at playing the game at all. Couple this with enemies like the massive turtle who can fire rockets faster than you can see them that will oftentimes one-shot you on hard mode, and the combat often turns from fun and tense to awkward and sloggy at the drop of a hat. Which is a total shame because it doesn't always feel bad and broken, but it does way more often than it should, which makes the combat feel more average and uneven. The separate weapons and options for combat aren't fun enough to toy around with, and I never felt like I had anything that would perfectly suit my preferred style of play. There were constant bugs with movement and getting stuck on ledges or monsters, and the melee combat, one of the biggest problems that many had with the first game, has not been improved nearly enough to be a viable alternative option, and is, if anything, way more janky than the ranged combat still. Performance-wise, the game runs well, but oh boy, it must be springtime because the bugs are coming out to play in full force. This game is littered with little bugs that affect almost every single facet of gameplay. In the beginning of the game, I didn't like how the camera moved and thought it behaved awkwardly and erratically. After playing with the settings like the dead zone and the control sticks, I finally got it to stop feeling so sticky yet also drifty at the same time and completely out of my hands. But this took about a half hour of game time in and out of combat to really hammer down. This happened to me in the first game too, and I have no idea why it's present in this series more than any other. In a game that relies almost entirely on the use of a bow and accurately shooting small pieces off of robots, it should feel a little tighter from the get-go. My biggest takeaway while playing was that occasionally I would do something that looked really cool, but I rarely felt very cool or accomplished for doing it, and that is a problem for which the combat receives a disappointing 13 out of 20. The next category I'm hitting is going to be exploration/activities. And this section of the game is one of its largest negatives. Unfortunately for me, Horizon Forbidden West is the closest game to an Ubisoft title you can get without it actually being an Ubisoft title. They've made the game world massive to really show off a lot of the graphical fidelity and lend a grand scope to the Forbidden West. What this means is a huge map filled to the brim with question marks and points of interest that really aren't all that interesting. The tedium begins with having to collect many crafting materials off of plants for healing items and sticks for arrows. Doing this, you'll realize that your starting quiver can't hold very many arrows, and you'll be spending half of your combat scenarios in the menu, crafting more arrows when you inevitably run out until you upgrade your pouches. Every weapon, item, and quiver has upgrades that require animals that need to be hunted down and killed and harvested. Doesn't sound too bad, right? Red Dead 2 had almost the exact same system, and it worked quite well there, so why wouldn't it work here? The huge problem that makes this game feel radically more tedious than in any other game is that not every animal has the item that you're looking for. Say you're looking for a blue jay for one of its feathers. Well, you go to where they're located on the map and find one. You shoot it down, you then locate its corpse and loot, but there's not a single feather to be found. Not only is this annoying, making one of the slowest parts of the game even slower, it trivializes hunting to be more about luck than any kind of skill or talent. You really expect me to believe that every salmon in this pond doesn't have a single bone, Aloy? Hell, this game makes me believe I'm a better hunter than Aloy because I can find a bone in just about every boneless salmon fillet from Safeway. Yeah, it doesn't matter how you kill the animals or where they're shot like it does in Red Dead for you to get the higher quality pelts, it just matters how many of them you take down. And this makes for an allegory for the entire game, because rather than focusing on just a couple activities or side quests that are handled with detail and care, the game fills your menu with quantity. It seems like quantity over quality is just the name of the game here, with most of the quests being just as shallow and unengaging as in the first game. There are a couple of actual fun new ones that they try out. The racing minigame comes to mind, but it's real buggy, and seems like it was added in at the last minute. And Guerrilla Games tried to incorporate their own version of Gwent with a board game that you can collect pieces for. While Gwent is immediately fun, interesting, and accessible, driving you to find more and more of the cards for their unique abilities, this game, for me at least, misses all these marks, and I never really got into it. Like the mostly unmemorable side quests, the main quests are mostly unremarkable as well, and waste a lot of the potential that I feel like the game builds and marketed. With San Francisco occupying the bulk of the marketing material for the game, I thought that some memorable locations would form the backdrop. In reality, it takes the greater portion of the game's 25 to 30 hours to finally get you there, and once there, you discover it's more tropical island with a broken bridge in the background than somewhere that's actually interesting to explore. I think they really missed the mark here with some of these locations. Rather than actually basing an area off of a previously stunning location with remnants of famous buildings being repurposed for the use of the tribes, it's mostly empty with so much empty space and nothingness littering the frankly too large map. There's a particular moment where you go to the ruins of Vegas and have to venture into the strip and drain it of water before turning the power back on. This is the most interesting moment of the game, but still feels a bit lifeless as Aloy is mostly venturing alone, not interacting or remarking on any of the, to her, supernatural-looking light shows and buildings of Las Vegas in its prime. It just feels like any other day for her, and this disinterest and lack of interaction with the environment only serves to weaken the joy of exploration of even the most technically interesting locales. There just feels like nothing to really see or explore that's worth your time. Take The Last of Us, where you're walking around with Ellie and she's interacting with the environment. Imagine her in this Vegas setting, pulling some of the levers of the coin slots and Joel warning her not to because he doesn't know what it might do in Aloy's shoes. It just doesn't make sense why they didn't work some of this stuff in here to give the characters a little more pathos and character. I mean, Aloy's apathy just becomes your own, and while I was so excited to see what San Francisco would look like in this game's rendition and the different things I could explore or point out, I found the renditions as lacking in solace as the many, many activities. When it comes to the moment-to-moment gameplay outside of combat, this is the definition of a turn-your-brain-off game, with every puzzle being instantly commented on by Aloy, spoon-feeding you the answer before you even have to consider how to go about solving it. There's a puzzle boss in the early parts of the game that I was invested in trying to figure out, but then I realized that if I just sat around long enough, Aloy would just tell me the answer, so I didn't really need to think too hard after all. This ruins any kind of satisfaction of figuring anything out on your own in this game, as it just gives you the answers so often that you come to expect it. The climbing as well consists of holding the joystick in the direction you want to climb and occasionally pressing X when the jump looks just a little too far. This is worsened by the camera going absolutely uncontrollably hog wild during some of these segments that take place in tighter spots, giving even the strongest stomachs a case of motion sickness. There is no skill associated with the platforming, and each section just about puts me to sleep and is made further worse by Aloy constantly misjumping and missing very reachable platforms. If you're ever at a loss of where to climb next, you can also click in the right stick to scan with your focus, which highlights every climbable surface with a garish yellow X. Just walking around houses and interiors is so frustrating as well in this game, as my Aloy climbed up onto counters and tables despite my telling her no so often I considered buying a squirt bottle to teach her to keep off. I think one of the worst parts about the exploration as well is how often you have to fight the robots and how many of them you have to take on at a time. While Elden Ring handles exploration seamlessly with you fighting when you want and how you want by allowing you to race away on your trusty spectral steed as well as picking up crafting materials on the fly with no slowdown at all, Horizon frequently forces you into combat as you try to ride by with your awkward to control, clunky mechanical horse. And everything just takes so long! The collecting takes a second or two for a pickup animation, the crafting takes 3 seconds for each set of things you need to craft, the equipping of a new weapon even takes time within the menu, and yeah, the mounts are back in a big way and I still don't like them very much at all. Potentially the worst parts of the first game are back and pushed to the forefront here. The major collectible as you power your way through the cauldrons, each mount doesn't feel incredibly rewarding to receive after some of the game's greatest challenges. The big issue with these is that they get stuck on literally everything. If you thought Aloy was tough to control, try steering one of these bad boys up the slightest of inclines. It feels like trying to scale a mountain in Skyrim with the player constantly jumping and sprinting to try to game the system, except these inclines are much less steep and you move much less quickly, and you'd probably be better off just running. I will say the side quests are a small step up from the first game, at least with the variety of what you're doing, and at least they tried, but the exploration and activities category still isn't anything to write home about for me, and it's more disappointing than good with its large focus on quantity over quality, resulting in me giving it an average 10 out of 20. The last category to review is the story.
Be a guy you stole, you losers. But it's the mother of all logic bombs.
The time for permission is over.
Then off we go.
And I'm gonna dip into some mild spoilers for a section of this review, probably the majority of the review, but I'll warn you before that happens and time mark it in the video. To start, I want to talk about the things that the first game did best. By setting the game in a post-apocalyptic world that the player doesn't realize is the far future of our world, it played around with the reveals and mysteries that actually did have satisfying payoffs. The game almost told 2 separate stories, with Aloy in the present discovering the secrets of the past and her own origins. While I wasn't sold on much of the present-day storyline, the past and how the world came to be how it ends up was extremely interesting and wrapped up in a satisfying way. Unfortunately, while the past contained some memorable characters and a superb villain in Ted Faro, the present-day characters were much more forgettable, apart from Silence, who carries a lot of the intrigue of the plot. In Forbidden West, many of the same characters are peppered throughout the story, introducing themselves as close friends that Aloy made many memories with in the first game, but joke's on them.
I don't even know who you are.
Even one of Aloy's main followers, Varl, I don't recall of being much importance in the first title. Maybe this is because of Aloy herself, who speaks in such a monotone, uncaring way about all of the people she's around. Which brings us to my biggest complaint about the series' story, its main character. Aloy just isn't likable, and I can see why she is the way she is. Cold and distant after being an outcast her whole life with only her father to talk to and everyone she forms a bond with dying soon after. I understand why she is the way she is, but I still don't like it. And here's where I'll start the spoiler section of the review, so if you don't want anything spoiled, cover your ears now or skip until the end of the section marked below. Aloy has all these relationships where people idolize her after her actions in the first game. She exemplifies the savior trope without doing anything to particularly get herself in people's good graces. Plans that absolutely shouldn't work because it's Aloy and everything just works for her. And she's constantly trying to take off in the middle of the night, abandoning her friends, when she knows that if she dies, the world ends. I think they have a right to be there for this. There's a point in the story where you go north to try and get a tribe to come join you in defense of their chieftain. They don't want to come because they believe themselves safe behind a massive snow wall. Aloy realizes this and theorizes that by blowing up the wall in full view of this tribe of traitors will surely get them to listen to her. I thought this plan was insane from the get-go when I thought she was going to do it stealthily. But she doesn't even do that. She blows up the wall with people standing on it, risking their lives to get what she wants while they're looking right at her, and it works. You can't apply logic to Aloy's actions because they all just pan out for her exactly how she wants. These are tribes that kill people for lesser slights, but they listen to an outsider who hasn't earned a moment of their respect for literally no reason. Your dialogue options and choices are also pretty limited and taken straight out of the meaningless dialogue trees in Fallout 4, but when they do matter, they are insane. At one point in the game, you are supposed to choose whether or not to kill a relentless murderer, essentially the main villain for the first 3/4 of the game, who is dead set on killing the chieftain she was once pledged to, and the chieftain tries to convince you to spare her. And his main reasoning is literally, whatever else she may be, she's a woman of her word. You mean this chick who has literally betrayed you, killed your marshals, and made 3 attempts on your life? Totally, yeah. I trust her too. They also bring in major voice talent, only to drastically underuse them. Did you like Silence in the first game and were excited to hang with him more in this one finally? Well, he's barely in it. It's like they spent too much money on these big actors, so they had to underutilize each and every one of them. And guess what? Ted Farrow from the first game is still alive, too. Yeah, the future people that show up early on, aka Patrick Speward, Ray Iota, and Tilda Slightly, are actually not the descendants of Earth from thousands of years ago. They're the very same people that left it. And Ted Farrow is alive as well, in a locked bunker in San Francisco. You can find him, but don't enter the room he's in, and he's murdered off-screen by another character because his genetic mutations went awry. God, they even ruined the things that were good in the first game's story. Sorry for the rant, but why would you keep the biggest megalomaniac piece of garbage alive for 1,000 years only to kill him off-screen immediately? Such a waste. I mean, if you were already sold on the idiotic plot development of people not aging and still being alive from the old world, why not use that in an interesting way at the very least by letting us have the true villain of the story be the true villain of the story? The other villains suck too, with Carrie-Anne Moss barely getting enough screen time to justify her casting. You don't really get a chance to trust her from the get-go, so when it turns out she was in a relationship with Sobek, humanity's savior, and whom Aloy was originally cloned from, and that she wants to kidnap Aloy and take her off-world, no one's really shocked. Just an aside, I think it's funny that Aloy interacts with another version of herself, Beta, and doesn't particularly like her very much. Even Aloy doesn't like Aloy, guys. The only likable character in this game is introduced early and killed off within 30 seconds of being introduced. R.I.P. Fashav, you almost convinced me that the characters were going to be better in this one. And Aloy just kind of stands there and watches. She does this multiple times. When her friends are in danger, she does not move to help in cutscenes. End of the spoiler section here, but these characters are just nowhere near good and memorable. They failed again at trying to make me care about any of these people. Sorry for the spoiler section taking up the bulk of this section, but in order to really get out my thoughts on this game and why I think the writing isn't that good and the characters are all not great and unmemorable, I really needed to get into the full spoilers. One more thing before the score. The characters, for some reason, constantly mention things from the old world like body bags in the post-apocalyptic tribal society, and that's just so funny to me. And another one says bagged and tagged, as if he's in the military. Not once do they use them or give any indication of knowing what they're talking about, but it's said at least 3 times throughout the game, which just seems weird. And in the end, this story, I just don't like it, and I really wish I did. I went into this hoping that I was going to like it and they were going to capitalize on the things that I loved about the first game and make them better. I've been saying since this came out that I think the first game is a great foundation for the second game, even though I don't love it. I thought it set up a lot, and if it improved on the things that it didn't do right in the first game, it could be so much better. But to me, it just didn't. And so the story scores a 7 out of 20. This means my final review score for Horizon Forbidden West is a 64 out of 100, earning it a place on the middle shelf. I think it speaks volumes that this game released to little fanfare and was completely surpassed in spectacle by Elden Ring just a few weeks later. For everything Horizon does right, it does something wrong at the same time. Horizon might be the prettiest girl at the ball, but it doesn't have enough to make it stand out alongside all those other open-world games that do the exact same things. I'm sorry, this one just wasn't for me, but hey, that's my opinion, and I know that mine varies wildly from the popular opinion on this one, so if I'm wrong, let me know in the comments. Please like, subscribe, let me know what I should review next down there as well. I'm on a bit of a roll right now, reviewing pretty much every major game that's been coming out, so I think I'm going to do Dying Light 2 next. Until then, I'll see you next time on The Bottom Shelf.